That evening, I returned home earlier than expected. My tired legs after a long day of hard work still couldn't stop me from entering my familiar apartment. The house was in darkness at that time, with only a weak nightlight coming from the bedroom, creating a quiet, cold space. I walked slowly, step by step. My heart couldn't help but be heavy with thoughts after a stressful day of work. But before I could think about everyday things, a gentle sound, a giggle, rang out from inside the bedroom and made me stop, as if time had suddenly stopped. Each step led me closer to the bedroom curtains. There, on the dim curtain, I saw the bold silhouettes of two people. A woman who I thought was everything in my life, and a strange man. In that moment, I stood still, my heart beating so hard it seemed to burst, and all my senses seemed to freeze at once. That image, unexpected and cruel, seemed to paint a dark picture in my mind, making me unable to look away. I didn't rush in. No screams, no shouts. I just stood there, silent, immersed in shock and endless pain. I remember the many sweet memories and sweet promises we once exchanged, but now, everything seems to disappear, losing its meaning as cruel betrayal piles up. The silhouette of the woman, the person I loved with all my heart, along with the image of the stranger, were like sharp knives cutting off my trust and hope in the blink of an eye. In that moment, chaotic thoughts rushed back. Who is that man? Why did she turn her back on me? Why was everything I trusted and loved so betrayed? Emotions exploded in my heart, mixed with helplessness and intense rage. I don't need to ask. I don't need to speak up. The truth was laid out clearly before my eyes, and it made me feel cold, as if my soul was being torn to pieces. I stood there quietly, in the dark room, where every moment passed like a never-ending nightmare. That betrayal was not only the deception of a woman, but also the destruction of trust, the dreams and hopes that I had worked so hard to build. Every image, every happy moment together is now just faded memories, corrupted by lies. I wonder if love is sometimes just a trick of fate, a trap that we build for ourselves. In that moment, amid the bitter cold of betrayal, I made an irreversible decision. I will not forgive. I do not allow myself to become a vulnerable victim. That betrayal lost everything precious in my heart: trust, love, and hope. But at the same time, it also lit a fire in me, a steadfast will to regain justice, to take perfect revenge for what was lost. In the hours that followed, as the room gradually fell silent, I began to remember every little detail of our life together. The times she lied about overtime work, the messages she tried to delete when I wasn't paying attention. Everything is now engraved in my mind. Every small detail is a piece of the puzzle, irrefutable evidence of that cruel betrayal. I decided not to let the pain drag me down into the abyss of self-destruction. Instead, I turned it into motivation to change my own destiny. I am no longer a weak man who only knows how to cry and give up. I know that in every tear, in every wound, there is a valuable lesson about life, a lesson about resilience, about the ability to get up after every fall. In the darkness of the room and in the midst of heavy memories, I silently promised myself that I would never let anyone, even the person I had given all my trust in, destroy me. I will get my own justice, not only for myself, but for everyone who has been betrayed. That decision, formed from the first moment I witnessed the cruel truth, became the foundation for my entire journey, the journey of perfect revenge. After that fateful night, when the darkness of betrayal overwhelmed everything around me, I realized that to survive in this world, I not only needed to overcome pain, but also turn it into strength. I'm not someone who will kneel down and beg or give up. She chose to deceive me, betrayed the love I had in my heart, and now I will decide her fate. Immediately after witnessing that unbelievable scene, I began to gather all the information that could help me better understand the truth. I quietly followed her daily schedule, keeping track of the times when she suddenly disappeared, or the times when she said overtime that now became vague. I persistently probed every detail, from the phone calls to the strange text messages, from the smallest signs on the phone that she tried to hide. Every piece of information, no matter how small, gradually contributes to the overall picture of betrayal. Not long after that, I realized that, in the chaos of evidence, there was something that made me stop and think more carefully. It was not all just the actions of a cheating woman, but there was something deeper behind it. I thought to myself, if I just stopped at accusing her of being a traitor, would it really bring me justice? Or can I go deeper, break through the whole system of lies and intrigue, to regain the honor that belongs to me? During those white nights at my desk, between papers, old photos, and deleted messages, I gradually built a meticulous revenge plan, detailed down to every number and every word. Every time I open her phone, I feel like I'm opening up a dark secret from the past. I recorded every conversation, every little detail that I used to take for granted. Each piece of the puzzle gradually appeared, showing me that she not only deceived me once, but also silently hid behind a shell of lies, covering up a painful truth. I don't want to simply leave. I want her to pay the ultimate price. The heart that was once filled with love is now filled with only anger and determination not to forgive. I know that if I let things like that pass, my pain will forever be a wound that cannot be healed. That's why I began to develop a revenge plan, not only to regain my honor, but also to make her feel the price of betrayal. As each day passed, I gradually became cold and cautious to the point of not allowing myself to show any emotions. I turned every sadness, every disappointment into motivation to investigate, to gather evidence for an unerring revenge plan. In each conversation, in each time I scrolled through the characters on my phone, I knew that each piece of information was a piece of the puzzle that brought me closer to the truth about a person who had betrayed and about a fate that I would never let go in vain. The contempt in my mind grew more and more each day as I quietly thought about the lies she had told, about the overtime stories she kept hidden. I told myself that for me, revenge was not just an act of anger, but also a way for me to regain control over my life. I don't need sympathy. I don't need excuses from anyone. I just need justice for myself. In my mind, the revenge plan gradually took shape with such meticulous details that there was no room for omissions. I began to rely on the pieces of information I gathered, combining them into a roadmap to the truth. Every hour at my desk, I felt empowered, as if I was energized by my own pain to create a strategy that could not be betrayed. I promised myself that, on the day the truth was revealed, no one, not her, not that man, could avoid the price of betrayal. Every moment, I felt the weight of the decision I had made. I don't know if, after everything disappears, I will still find myself again. But one thing I am sure of, I will never let that betrayal be the end of my life. On the contrary, it will be a catalyst for me to overcome, for me to turn pain into strength, and for me to stand up, not only for myself, but also for everyone who has ever believed in sincere love. In the quiet darkness of the room, with the dim nightlight as a reminder of unforgettable memories, I told myself that revenge is not only a quest for justice, but also a journey to find the person who has been lost in the storm of lies. I began to build a plan step by step, from gathering evidence to making drastic moves to completely disrupt the life she, along with that stranger, had created. Every time I look at the deleted messages and calls, I realize more and more that in those moments of weakness, there was a painful internal battle. I once dreamed of a lasting love, a happy family, but now all that remains are bitter memories, the inspiration for a cruel and perfect revenge plan. I do not allow myself to fall into a state of self-pity or regret. Instead, I decided to turn every tear, every heartache into a launching pad for me to rise, so that I can become stronger in the face of lies and betrayal. During the investigation, I gradually understood that my revenge was not only aimed at punishing her, the person who betrayed me, but also to confirm for myself that I deserved better things. I don't need to cling to the past. I don't need to live in the darkness of betrayal. Every piece of evidence, every lie she tells me now only makes me more determined. I will regain my inherent honor. During long, sleepless nights, I sat at my desk, my eyes attentively looking at every detail on the paper, every signature, every trace of lies. I feel that right in that dark moment, a new person is gradually forming. Someone who is no longer vulnerable to lies. Someone who can stand up after every fall and fight for himself. I told myself that tomorrow, when justice is served, all those who betrayed will pay the price, and I will be the one to control my own destiny. And then, when the sunrise came through the window, I felt like I was reborn. Although my heart is still full of wounds that have not yet healed, a new strength has sparked inside, helping me realize that, no matter how cruel this world is, I am the one who decides how I live. The plan of revenge, the plan of not forgiving betrayal, was formed and became alive in my every thought and every action. I know that the road ahead will not be easy. It will be full of thorns and challenges. But my determination grew more and more, understanding more and more that, to find myself, to regain the value I had lost, I had to face the truth, even if that truth shattered everything around me. I am no longer someone who blindly loves unconditionally, but now I have learned to protect myself with both my mind and heart. With each passing moment, the revenge plan becomes sharper and more precise. I gradually realized that my pain is not only something to cherish, but also a motivation to move forward, to show that, no matter who betrays, they will never escape the price of deception. I promised myself that, on the day the truth was revealed, not only her but also that stranger would feel the pain of betrayal, the pain that I had suffered, and that I was determined not to let others have to live in regret and guilt. After gradually perfecting my revenge plan, I tried to lengthen the gap between emotions and reason, but unexpectedly, the truth behind the veil of lies came to me more cruelly than ever. I imagined all kinds of people who could be behind that betrayal. In my mind, I used to think, could it be a young colleague who is full of vitality and enthusiasm, or a gentle neighbor, always quietly living next door that I never pay attention to? Or perhaps it was a rich guy, someone who gave her material things that I couldn't provide? Those theories swirled around in my mind during those stressful hours as I continuously rummaged through hidden messages and photos on her phone that she tried to erase. I wondered, is it all just useless imagination? Or is there a cruel reality waiting for me behind the cover of lies? The closer I got to the truth, the more I felt a storm of emotions rising inside me. And then, one dark afternoon after long days of investigating, I accidentally opened a photo album on my phone that I thought had been erased. There, among the unrelated photos, I suddenly came across a photo of her and a man together. I was suddenly stunned when I realized that that man's face was none other than my best friend, the person I trusted with all my heart, the person who was always by my side through all the ups and downs. Every second of that moment seemed to last forever. When their images appeared clearly on the screen, I almost dropped the phone. The text messages exchanged between the two of them, sweet words that I had never heard before, tore away all the trust I had. I wonder how long they have been secretly working together to build a life of lies behind my back. The friend I once considered a comrade, the one who shared all the joys and sorrows. Old memories came rushing back, times when we shared faith together, laughed together, faced difficulties together, now suddenly became full of irony, making me feel like I was betrayed twice, not only by my wife, but also by the close friend I once loved. Extreme pain spread throughout my soul, and tears fell silently that I didn't dare admit. In that moment, I clearly felt that not only her, but also my close friend, the person I had trusted for so long, was also part of the plot of lies. This truth is not only an extreme shock, but also a reminder that people can hide the darkest secrets, even in the closest relationships. I felt like everything was falling apart before my eyes. I knew that, to execute the perfect revenge plan, I had to understand every detail of the betrayal. The appearance of that close friend, the person I once trusted and shared many memories with, further increased the cruelty of the story. I told myself that my plan must be further refined and perfected, because now there is not just one betrayer, but two people, both my wife and my best friend, who have joined hands to steal the trust and love that I once gave. During those long hours facing the truth, I couldn't help but wonder, how long have they been together behind my back? Was I blind in believing too much in sweet words and close friendship? That question still echoes in my mind, like the echoes of a storm that will never subside. I know that, in that moment, everything changed. Betrayal is not just the action of one person, but a sophisticated conspiracy, where trust and love are betrayed in a multidimensional way, making me feel like I have been pushed into the abyss of loneliness and injustice. As I sat there, staring at the phone, each text message appearing like pieces of a cruel picture, I knew that the turning point in my life had come. My revenge plan, which had been formed since that night, now needed to be upgraded, needed to be more perfect than ever to return justice to myself. The cruel truth that had just been revealed made me realize that to regain my honor and regain my lost self, I not only had to face my own pain, but also had to face betrayal from the people I once trusted and loved. Soon after the truth about my best friend and my wife was revealed in painful text messages, I decided it was time to take the next step in my revenge plan. I arranged a meeting with him, whom I now considered an unforgivable part of this treacherous plot. The meeting was carefully arranged, with no signs of suspicion. I pretended everything was still the same. The smile on my lips hadn't changed. My laughter still rang out as naturally as in the old days. When we sat across from each other in a familiar coffee shop, the air seemed to be filled with memories and jokes that I had shared with him before. But now, all of that is just a cover for the sophisticated plan that I have been building for a long time. He, with his eager eyes and friendly appearance, was not suspicious at all when I started the story. "I have a big business idea. Do you want to invest?" Those words sounded simply, as if without the slightest evil intention. I heard those words with a cold heart. A storm of emotions that could not be contained broke out inside me. I led him into a long conversation, in which I delicately incorporated the details I had painstakingly gathered. Every word, every question was carefully planned by me to lure him into the trap I had set up in advance. During that meeting, he seemed to completely believe in my big business proposal, unaware that at this very moment, he was slowly entering the siege that I had carefully prepared. With each passing moment, I felt the change in his eyes, from initial curiosity to excitement and gradually belief in new opportunities. But inside me, my heart grew colder and colder, knowing that as soon as he entered this game, his life would never be the same. I hid my true feelings, leaving only a faint smile and a warm voice, as if I just wanted to discuss a promising business project with him. The words exchanged between us became so fluent that no one could guess my true intentions. But in my mind, every word he said were bricks building a wall of justice, of a revenge plan that I was sure would make him pay a heavy price. I wasn't worried at all when he started asking questions about the project, because I had prepared everything, from fake documents to the smallest evidence to prove his dishonesty in the past. In that moment, I understood that this was the perfect time to lead him into the world of intrigue and traps that I had carefully arranged. I turned everything into a chess game where he couldn't see the meticulous arrangement behind it. I guided him, step by step, so that he became more and more confident in the project I proposed. Every time he gave an opinion, I quietly noted it. Every little detail was engraved in my mind to serve the revenge plan I had long cherished. My coldness during that conversation did not change. Only inside my heart was a fierce storm of hatred and determination. I know that, immediately after this meeting, not only him, the person who betrayed my loyalty, but also the relationship we have built over the years will be transformed. I will destroy his life in a way he never expected, to make him feel the pain of betrayal, to let him know that no one is exempt from the price of deception. The meeting ended in silence. He left with eyes full of hope and confidence, not knowing that right at that moment, he had entered a maze with no way out. As for me, as I watched his leaving figure, my heart was cold but also filled with a feeling of victory. The feeling that my revenge plan was gradually progressing perfectly, according to what I had so diligently prepared. In that moment, I understood that even though the losses and pain may continue to haunt me, I have found a way out, a way to turn the pain into strength. I showed him part of the truth, a business proposal that was not simply a business opportunity, but a sophisticated trap that would make him face the consequences of his own betrayal. After leading my close friend, the traitor, into an elaborate trap through a business meeting, I began to gradually drag him into the game that I had carefully orchestrated. Everything is ready. Every piece of the revenge plan is now gradually transforming into reality, in the exact order that I once meticulously calculated. I made him believe that he was seizing a great opportunity, a business project that promised to bring huge profits. Meetings and phone conversations were carefully arranged by me, making him feel confident and enthusiastic about investing. While he put all his faith in the project, I silently manipulated everything, step by step building an unbreakable wall around him. I created huge debts in his name, using financial tools and fake tricks to make him gradually sink into the spiral of debt storm. The fake contracts and bogus documents were meticulously arranged by me, like each cold brick in a project where I destroyed his reputation and career. Every time he believes that an opportunity awaits, I quietly add another piece to his corrupt picture, causing him to step further away from his own control. Not only that, I also forged evidence, presented elaborately crafted evidence, to confirm that he had become a traitor in the eyes of his partners and the entire business community. I set everything up so that, with just one word, just one small action on his part, all the connections, all the trust he had built over the past time would completely collapse. I wanted him to feel the pain of knowing that, because he betrayed my loyalty and trust. He was losing everything, the job, the reputation, the career he had dreamed of. As each day passes, the pressure, mounting debts, and evidence of manipulation gradually weigh more heavily on his shoulders. I watched from afar, not showing any emotion, while inside I surged with anger and a sense of satisfaction at witnessing the downfall of the man who had betrayed me. I know that he has hurt me, and now he will know that feeling, the feeling of being betrayed, the feeling of losing everything important in life. Every little detail is perfectly arranged by me. I didn't miss any opportunity to make him stumble. I secretly collected every word, every false transaction, and turned them into weapons to attack him in the eyes of my partner. Every meeting, every contract becomes living evidence of his betrayal, of his no longer being trustworthy. He gradually lost support, was pushed into a corner of the business world, where his reputation was destroyed, where all doors gradually closed. In dark times, when all seems to be chaos of pain and failure, I tell myself, this is when justice is served. He betrayed me, and no one, not even a close friend, not even a business partner, can avoid the price of deception. I know that my journey of revenge is not over, but every step makes me feel stronger and more determined to bring him to the brink of despair, where he will have to face the consequences of his actions. I don't need to tell anyone, because everything already exists in every detail that I painstakingly built. The tension increased. The atmosphere around him became so heavy that everyone began to retreat. Every word, every look contained shyness and suspicion. And in the darkness of that collapse, I still stand, the one in control of his fate, the one who betrayed me. When everything seemed to be going according to plan, and the traitor was gradually pushed to the brink of collapse, another cruel truth emerged, leaving me in a state of unbelievable shock. In the moment I thought my revenge had reached its peak, I discovered something that cut my heart. My wife, the person I once considered a safe harbor, the person I had given all my trust to, was just a pawn in his game. With eyes blurred by tears and a storm of emotions, I realized that my wife, the person who said she loved me with all her heart, did not recognize his true nature. She had been deceived, but not as I thought. Not my betrayer, but the victim of an exploit. He did not love her at all, but only used her to extort money and achieve his own goals. The sweet words and initial promises were just a cover to cover up his business schemes. When I faced this truth, the pain in my heart seemed to double, making me feel even more confused and shaken. I remember the moments we spent together, the times my wife thoughtfully shared, laughed, and talked to me as if the whole world was just the two of us. But now, all are just illusions, faded memories covered by betrayal and lies. I wonder if she realizes that, in his game, she is just an easily manipulated piece, a pawn with no choice but to accept the fate he has arranged. In that dark moment, I stood between two opposing emotions, anger and pity. I felt betrayed twice, not only by my close friend who conspired with him, but also by the woman I once gave all my love to. This painful truth makes me wonder, should I continue to take revenge, or should I forgive her? In my mind, that question was like a fresh wound, stirring up emotional turmoil I was not prepared for. My heart was heavy when I saw my wife, who always seemed weak and longing to be loved, now falling apart before my eyes. She cried, begging me for forgiveness. I was wrong. I didn't know he was just taking advantage of me. Those words echoed in the space, but it seemed there was no power to save the destined fate. I stood there, silent, not responding at all, because in my mind, a final decision had appeared with no room left for concessions. The feelings of betrayal, pain, and loss had piled up, turning everything into a blur, like a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. I wonder if I can forgive her, when the betrayal comes not only from outsiders, but also from the person I have loved and trusted for so long. All memories, all dreams of a happy family are now just shattered pieces, scattered in my mind. With a confused state of mind, I stood at the crossroads of fate. Two paths appear before us. The path of continuing revenge, continuing to bury grudges, or the path of forgiveness, to try to save a relationship, even though it has been damaged beyond recognition. In that moment, I knew that my decision would determine both of our fates. I've spent my whole life building trust, to love completely, and now, when betrayal speaks, I feel like I'm no longer the person I once knew. But at the same time, I also felt a new strength surging, the strength of self-determination, of not accepting defeat in the face of fate. I told myself that no matter how much pain there was, no matter how much loss I had to find myself again. Had to make a decision based not only on the emotions at that time, but also on the awakening of my soul. Looking into my wife's wet eyes, I felt weakness, regret, but also a fragile bit of love that was never truly lost. Although she was also a victim of exploitation, she also caused pain to me. An unforgettable pain, a deep wound that I don't know will ever heal. In that confusing moment, I knew that my final decision would not only affect my own destiny, but also reshape my entire life. The feelings of betrayal, lies, and loss became a fire, making it impossible for me to forgive easily. But in my mind, amid the storm of emotions, I also wonder if forgiveness is sometimes a way to free ourselves from the shackles of the past. Faced with that choice, I remained silent, letting my soul answer for itself. The pain and tears that flowed through many long nights gradually created a different person. A person who was no longer vulnerable, no longer letting anyone determine his happiness. And in that moment, I realized that, whether I forgive or not, the most important thing is that I have rediscovered my own value and have understood that love and trust should only be given to those who deserve it. Finally, after a storm of emotions, I made my own decision. Even though the pain still lingered, I decided to continue on the path of revenge, not because of the mounting anger, but because I needed to prove to myself that, no matter how betrayed I was, I still deserved better. That decision, although it hurt my heart once more, was also a turning point that helped me stand firm on the path to finding myself. I know that the road ahead is still long and bumpy, but I am ready to face all consequences with all emotions, because in the end, I just need to live fully, live in a way that I believe in my own value. Even though my wife was also a victim in his game, I cannot forgive that betrayal, cannot let the past fade the trust I have built in my heart. In that last moment, between eyes torn between regret and indifference, I could only quietly tell myself, I will not let that lie or betrayal determine my happiness. Even if everything around me collapses, I will still find myself and let justice be served in my own way. When everything around me gradually collapsed in a storm of revenge plots, I was suddenly faced with the moment when my soul fell into unpredictable adversity. In front of me, my wife, the person I once trusted and loved and considered a safe haven, now stood shaking in pain and guilt. In the gloomy space of the end, she trembled and cried, the sound of tears falling wetly on her cheeks as in a weak voice. She pleaded, I was wrong. I didn't know he was only using me. I stood there, silent, my eyes never leaving the image of the woman who was my everything. Before my eyes is a broken picture of lost trust, of love that is now only ashes. The mixed feeling of anger and pain crept throughout my mind, making me not know whether to continue taking revenge or to forgive to save a part of the past. In that moment, I suddenly wondered, can forgiveness heal deep wounds? Or can I, who once stood firmly on the foundation of faith, somehow help her escape the fate she herself helped create? My steps seemed to stop at the fateful crossroads of my life. In silence, I looked into her eyes filled with regret, but also containing a fragile bit of love that had not completely extinguished. That image shocked me, making my heart feel like it was being torn into pieces. I recall many memories of when she laughed and talked, hugged me on rainy days, when we shared every joy and sadness together. But now, all of that is just a distant memory, pale before the cruel reality. In the midst of a storm of emotions, I stood between two paths. The path of forgiveness, a path that could lead to healing, but could also make me continue to be bound to the past. Or the path of revenge, the path I have been on since the first moments, where justice is sought at the price of pain and loss. I clearly felt every fast heartbeat, every breath as if it were heavy with responsibility for a decision that no one can take back. In that moment, I quietly told myself, I have lost too much. Not only lost my faith, but also lost a part of myself. If I forgive, can I save the rest of me? Or is revenge the only way to show me that I deserve better? The moments passed slowly, each moment increasing the anxiety in my mind. Finally, after a long period of silent reflection and intense introspection, I made an irreversible decision. I will not forgive. That decision did not only come from anger or pain from betrayal, but also an affirmation to myself that no matter what happened, I would never lose my own values. I realized that no matter how many difficulties there were, no matter how many tears were shed, I needed to stand up, not only to punish the person who betrayed, but also to assert for myself that I deserve to live a fulfilling life, a life not determined by those who only know how to hurt. In that moment, although the pain still lingered, I knew it was time to move on, step out of the spiral of betrayal and lies, even if that meant losing the person who was my everything. After deciding not to forgive and choosing the path of revenge, I walked away from the life I thought was my own. A cold decision, but necessary to allow me to live the way I believe I deserve. I left her life, not with blind hatred, but with a long cherished determination. The decision that justice and truth would be affirmed, even at the cost of everything. He, the one who betrayed his trust, along with his close friend, who was complicit in the deceitful scheme, lost everything. I had orchestrated everything so that he could not escape the spiral of mounting debts, of a ruined reputation, and of the collapse of the business world he once confidently held. Each step of his revenge plan makes him lose more power and sink deeper into the abyss of failure. My wife, even though she was just a victim of exploitation, cannot make up for the betrayal she contributed to. She lost me, and through that, gradually realized her own mistakes, realizing that trust and love cannot be easily given without responsibility. But the most important thing to me is not that they suffered the consequences, but that I found myself again. In the tough battle with pain, betrayal, and at the cost of self-esteem, I rediscovered my own inherent value. I have learned that revenge is not about satisfying temporary anger, but about affirming that I can never be defined by those who do not deserve me, that I am worthy of living a fulfilling life with better things. When I look back on my journey through many bitter moments, I realize that revenge, although it brings a temporary feeling of victory, is not the ultimate goal of my life. In the end, what I need, the most important thing, is to regain my own self, a person no longer burdened with the past, no longer haunted by the wounds of betrayal. I walked, step by slow but steady step, away from that dark past, with my heart no longer buried in pain. I told myself that, even though revenge might bring losses, it was that decisiveness that helped me see my own value more clearly. Now, when everything is over, I understand that sometimes revenge is not only a way to defeat the person who hurt you, but also a journey to find yourself, to know that, after the storms of life, only those who dare to stand up will truly win. In the final moments of my journey, I didn't look back. I have left behind me a past full of sin and pain, to move forward with faith in a brighter tomorrow. That was my final decision, the decision to take back myself, to prove that, although betrayal can cut off trust, in the end, only I can decide my own destiny. Now, when it's all over, I confidently look in the mirror and see a new person. A person no longer oppressed by the past, a person proud of his own value. Even though there are still wounds in my heart that have not completely healed, I know that through it all, I am still a winner. And so, in the stillness of a foggy afternoon, I affirmed. I had walked out of her life, had made him lose everything, and most importantly, I had gotten myself back. Sometimes revenge is not to satisfy anger, but to affirm that we deserve better things, to never let unworthy people determine our happiness. Through my tearful and painful story, I realized that life is not simply sweet joys, but also a series of challenges and wounds that need to be healed over time. I have experienced the pain of betrayal, of those I once trusted, and in the storm of hatred, I have rediscovered myself. A strong, self-reliant person who will never let the past determine the future. The darkest moments have taught me that every wound contains a valuable lesson. Love, trust, and honesty are only valuable when they are given to those who deserve it. Betrayal forced me to face loneliness and loss, but at the same time opened the door for me to realize my own worth. I learned that, instead of wallowing in pain, we can turn it into strength to overcome adversity, to affirm that everyone deserves to live a fulfilling life, proud of themselves. I share this story not only to express my own pain, but also to remind everyone to cherish love and trust, and never allow someone to hurt your heart. Live the way you believe you deserve, with courage, with confidence, and with faith in the good things ahead. Revenge can bring a temporary sense of justice, but what is more important is finding the true person inside us, a person who never gives in to any challenge. If my story touches your heart, please join me in sharing and spreading this message. Never let the wounds of the past determine your happiness. Be strong, be confident, and always know that everyone has the right to live a full life, worthy of the best things. If you feel this story is meaningful, please like and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next touching and profound stories. Thank you for listening, and I hope you always find light amid life's challenges.
Hello everyone, enjoy these moments of relaxation while you watch. St. Michael's Church was shrouded in an atmosphere of mourning. The solemn tolling of the church bells intertwined with the muffled sobs of the grieving, creating a chilling, heartbreaking scene. Clara stood silently by her husband's coffin, holding little Lucy tightly in her arms. The 2-year-old struggled against her mother's embrace, her tiny face flushed red from crying too much. Clara bent down to soothe her, but Lucy refused to be comforted. The child's innocent eyes remained fixated on the wooden coffin where Samuel lay motionless. "Papa," Lucy sobbed, her tiny fingers trembling as she pointed toward the coffin. Clara swallowed hard, gripping the dark mourning veil tightly. She wanted to cry, but the tears were trapped in her throat. Samuel's sudden death still felt like a nightmare. Just yesterday he had kissed her goodbye before leaving home, and now all that remained was a lifeless, cold body. Around Clara, the villagers gathered, whispering among themselves. No one understood how a healthy man like Samuel could die so suddenly. Some said it was an accident, while others murmured that it was fate's cruel punishment. Mrs. Rose, an elderly woman who lived near Clara, stepped closer, her eyes filled with sympathy. She gently placed a hand on Clara's shoulder and whispered, "My dear, I know you're in pain, but little Lucy, are you sure she's okay?" Clara looked down at her daughter and noticed Lucy trembling. The little girl's wide eyes were staring at a dark corner behind the coffin. Suddenly, the child let out a piercing scream. "Daddy!
Daddy is trapped!"
He's calling for help!" The air inside the church grew thick with unease. After Lucy's scream, the atmosphere in the church became unbearably heavy. Whispering spread through the congregation, but no one dared to speak aloud. Some exchanged bewildered glances, while others bowed their heads in doubt, unsure whether to believe the words of a 2-year-old. The silence deepened. The only sound was the wind whistling through the stained glass windows, carrying the chilling essence of a sorrowful mourning. And then,
Thud.
a heavy sound echoed from inside the coffin. The entire church fell into a deathly hush. Some people gripped each other's hands, their hearts pounding wildly, unable to believe what they had just heard. A few village women shuddered, their trembling hands making the sign of the cross, desperately convincing themselves that it was just the wind, just a coincidence. But how could the wind make a sound like that? Mrs. Rose, the eldest in the village, stepped back in fear, her frail hands clutching onto a nearby wooden pew. Her voice wavered as she murmured, "A child can see what we cannot." Her words sent shivers through many in the room. Clara felt her breathing grow rapid. Her fingers clenched around her mourning veil, trying to steady herself. Her heart pounded so violently it felt like it might burst from her chest. She knelt down, looking at Lucy with a forced calm in her voice. "What did you say, sweetheart?" Lucy clung tightly to her mother's dress, her wide, teary eyes filled with certainty. Her small voice, though shaky, was clear. "Daddy hasn't left. He's still here, calling for Mommy." The child's innocent but firm words cut through the suffocating tension in the church like a knife. Some shivered, others stood frozen, as a creeping fear slithered into every shadowed corner of the ancient church. Then, as if to affirm Lucy's claim, an unexpected gust of wind surged through the room, whipping through the black funeral drapes that hung over the stained glass windows. The candles on the altar flickered wildly, their flames battling against the darkness. Some of the weaker flames extinguished, leaving an eerie, haunting gloom behind. At the same moment, the church doors creaked open, the old hinges groaning under the weight, as if something unseen had just entered. Every head turned at once. A tall figure stood at the entrance. Inside the church, silence pressed down like a suffocating weight. The hushed whispers died away, and all eyes locked onto the doorway. Henry stepped inside, dressed in a black suit, his hair meticulously combed, his face composed, yet his gaze was unnervingly cold. He moved slowly, each deliberate step echoing across the stone floor as he approached Clara, who still clung tightly to Lucy. Henry smiled, a gesture meant to be sympathetic. But there was something unsettlingly insincere about it. A chill ran through those around him. He bowed his head slightly, his voice smooth yet measured. "Clara, you must be exhausted. We are all heartbroken over Samuel's passing." Clara simply nodded, her eyes still glassy with unshed tears, too drained to respond. She didn't want to speak to Henry, but his gaze flickered toward Lucy, the little girl still clinging to her mother's dress, her large eyes wide with fear, her small body trembling. Henry hesitated, his expression tightening for a brief moment. Lucy's gaze remained fixed on the coffin, her tiny hand trembling as she pointed at it, her lips quivering as if struggling to speak. Henry's eyes darkened, his voice carrying a quiet but unmistakable warning. "The child is too young to understand. She shouldn't be saying such things. It might frighten people. Though his words were soft, there was an underlying sharpness, a veiled threat that made Clara's stomach twist with unease. Why was Henry so concerned with what Lucy was saying? The unease in his expression, the way his eyes bore into Lucy, it wasn't just disbelief, it was fear. But before Clara could process it further, Henry abruptly changed the subject. His voice softened, but his words grew even colder. Samuel left behind quite a mess financially. Your house. It would be best to sell it to pay off his debts. Clara's body went rigid. Her head snapped up, eyes widening in shock. Henry's words were like a blade of ice piercing straight into her chest, stealing the breath from her lungs. Samuel had just passed, and before he was even buried, Henry was already bringing up money. A freezing dread crawled up Clara's spine. She held Lucy tighter, her pulse racing with rising panic and suspicion. But Henry continued as if his proposal was nothing more than a logical solution. You know, Samuel was a good man, but he had his troubles. He sighed, pretending to be deeply concerned for Clara and Lucy. I'm only thinking about what's best for you and your daughter. But Clara didn't believe him. Something was very wrong. Lucy tightened her grip on her mother's dress, her tear-streaked face resolute as she pointed again at the coffin, her voice soft but unwavering. Daddy is trapped. A chill slithered down Clara's spine. She turned to Henry just in time to see his expression falter for a brief moment. For just a second, barely even noticeable, Henry's eyes flickered with something close to panic. Then just as quickly he masked it. His jaw tightened, his fists clenched, and his expression turned stone cold. Clara didn't look away. She could feel the tension radiating off Henry, could see it in the smallest of his movements. Why? Why was he reacting this way to Lucy's words? If Samuel had truly died from an accident, why did Henry look as though he was hiding something? Inside the church, the atmosphere thickened, growing heavier by the second. The villagers shifted uncomfortably, glancing at one another with uncertainty, but no one dared to speak. Henry remained still, his hands balled into tight fists, his eyes darkened, shrouded with something unspoken. And then in that suffocating silence, another knock echoed from inside the coffin. The air inside the church was thick with unbearable tension. Whispers filled the space, yet no one dared to speak aloud. Some villagers trembled as they stepped back, distancing themselves from the coffin as if afraid that standing too close would force them to confront a horrifying truth they weren't ready to accept. The candles on the altar continued to flicker erratically, their wavering flames mirroring the growing unease that gripped everyone in the room. Some of the village women clutched their rosaries, murmuring quiet prayers, desperately seeking divine protection from the eerie presence that was slowly making itself known. Mrs. Rose closed her eyes, her breathing ragged. Her voice, though shaky, was loud enough for those nearby to hear. "O Lord, if his soul has not found peace, let us know the truth. Do not let a restless spirit remain trapped forever." Bang! The church doors suddenly flew open with a deafening crash, shattering the silence. Matthew burst in, breathless, his face pale with horror. "Clara, there's something you need to know." She flinched, spinning around to face him, her breath catching in her throat. Her heartbeat pounded erratically, as if her body already sensed that something terrible was about to be revealed. Matthew struggled to regain his breath, his eyes burning with urgency and rage. "A few days before Samuel died," he spoke between gasps. "He told me that Henry kept pressuring him to sell the house. Samuel refused, and the next day he had his accident." The entire church froze. The murmurs died instantly. Clara stood in shock, an icy shiver crawling down her spine, making her skin prickle. "No, that's impossible," she whispered, her voice trembling, her wide eyes refusing to believe what she had just heard. Matthew's words cut through her like a razor-sharp blade, carving into the doubts she had been trying so hard to suppress ever since Samuel's passing. Samuel couldn't have just died like that. He had always been strong, always careful. A sudden, unexplained accident, right after refusing Henry? It couldn't be a coincidence. Lucy tugged on her mother's hand, her small fingers tightening, tears streaming down her little face. Her voice came out urgent, shaky. "Mommy, Daddy is crying." She was staring at the coffin, her teary eyes filled with certainty. Her words were like a storm tearing through the church. Everyone held their breath. And then, thud! Another sound came from the coffin. This time louder, stronger, more certain. This was no wind, this was no shifting wood. It was real, it was undeniable. The villagers panicked. Some screamed, others stumbled backward, while many stood frozen in place, their faces pale as death. Clara's hands turned ice cold. Every nerve in her body rang like an alarm bell. Some people clung to one another, unsure of what to do. Mrs. Rose trembled, clutching onto a wooden pew, her eyes wide with terror. "Dear God, this cannot be happening." Some of the women fell to their knees, praying feverishly, their voices rising in desperate pleas for divine protection. But Clara couldn't turn away. None of this could be a coincidence. Everything pointed to a horrifying question she had never dared to ask. Had Samuel never actually died? Her chest tightened, her hands clenching into fists, forcing herself to remain calm amidst the chaos. "Matthew," her voice was hoarse. "Are you certain?" Matthew swallowed hard, then nodded firmly, his eyes unwavering. "I swear on my honor, Clara. I couldn't stay silent any longer. Samuel told me, right before his accident, that he never trusted Henry." The shattered pieces in Clara's mind began to fall into place. Henry, his relentless pressure to sell the house, Samuel's sudden, unexplained death, Henry's eerie insistence that she sell the house right after, and now the knocking inside the coffin. Thud, thud, thud. This time the sound was faster, stronger, more desperate. No one could deny it anymore. Something or someone was inside. Panic swept through the villagers. Some ran towards the exit, but no one dared to step outside, as if an invisible force kept them trapped. A man shouted, "We can't just leave it like this." A woman fell to her knees, sobbing, "What if he's still alive?" But amidst the chaos, Henry remained silent. Clara spun around to face him, her eyes burning with rage. "Henry, tell me the truth. Did you have anything to do with this?" Henry stiffened. His gaze darted nervously, his hands clenched into fists, his breathing quickened. Every eye in the church turned to him, but before Henry could say a word, a horrifying sound shattered the tension. Thud! 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 This time the knocking wasn't just noise. It was forceful. It was frenzied. It was desperate, as if someone inside the coffin was pleading for help. Some villagers screamed, others collapsed to the floor, eyes wide with horror. Clara felt the blood in her veins freeze solid. Lucy clung to her dress, sobbing. "Mommy, Daddy is calling for you." The entire church was paralyzed. And then the church doors swung open again. A voice rang out, firm and commanding. "Open the coffin immediately!" Clara turned toward the source of the voice. It was Father Manuel. The knocking from inside the coffin was no illusion. It was real, loud, persistent, desperate. The church fell into complete silence. No one moved. No one spoke. No one knew what to do. Some of the women clutched their crosses, their hands trembling. Others grabbed onto each other, whispering frantic prayers. But even God couldn't erase the terror that now consumed the room. A few villagers tried to run for the door, but their legs felt weak. They remained frozen in place, paralyzed by the weight of fear. Every face had turned pale. Every breath was shallow and panicked, as if an invisible hand was tightening around their throats. And then in the suffocating silence, a voice cut through, sharp and chilling. "No one is opening that coffin." Gasps filled the church as heads turned. Henry stood there, rigid, eyes bloodshot, his fists clenched so tightly his knuckles had turned white. His entire body was tense, as if ready to lunge at anyone who dared take another step toward the coffin. His forehead glistened with sweat. His voice was low but firm, trembling with barely restrained panic. But behind the anger was fear. James, one of the older men in the village, stepped forward, his eyes steely and unwavering. "Henry, why are you afraid of opening it? If you have nothing to hide, let us see what's inside." All eyes bore into Henry. He shook his head wildly, stepping back. His voice wavered, his breath unsteady. "No, this is blasphemy. You're all making a terrible mistake." But James didn't budge. He took another step forward, his voice unwavering. "No, Henry, the only one who's afraid here is you." At that moment, the doors burst open once more. A powerful gust of wind rushed inside, flinging the black funeral drapes into the air. A figure stepped into the church, Dr. Esteban. His face was ashen, his breathing ragged. He had run to get here. The villagers turned to him, their silence deafening. And then his voice rang through the church like a hammer striking metal. "Stop everything!" The church froze. Clara felt a shudder course through her spine. Lucy buried her face in her mother's dress, sobbing. Dr. Esteban's voice was grim as he delivered the words that sent a chill through every soul in that church. Samuel's death certificate was signed by a doctor who does not exist. A deadly silence. And then, "Open the coffin!" Esteban's shout sliced through the suffocating silence of the church like a blade. The entire room plunged into a deathly stillness, with only his frantic voice echoing in the air. His face was ashen, his breath ragged, as though he had run with everything he had just to get here. Samuel's death certificate was forged. No one officially confirmed his death. "We must open the coffin immediately." Gasps rippled through the villagers. Some people stared in open-mouthed horror. while hushed murmurs of panic spread like wildfire. A few clung to one another while others collapsed to their knees, whispering desperate prayers. Many backed away from the coffin, as though it held something beyond their darkest fears. No one dared to breathe, no one dared to speak. Every gaze remained locked onto the oak coffin at the center of the church. Henry, standing closest to it, suddenly stumbled back. His entire body trembled, his bloodshot eyes wild, as if a monster had just ripped through the veil of his soul and exposed his deepest secrets. He gasped for air, his mouth opening and closing soundlessly, unable to form words. No. This is wrong. This is all a mistake. His voice was hoarse, frantic, like a man cornered with no escape. But no one believed him anymore. They had seen his reaction. They had felt the sheer terror radiating from every movement of his body. And that alone told them the horrifying truth. Henry was hiding something. James, the village elder, took a slow step forward. His sharp eyes swept over the crowd, then settled on Henry. He didn't speak. He simply turned to Matthew and gave a firm nod. No more words were needed. Without hesitation, Matthew and James moved toward the coffin. The villagers parted, forming a circle around them, holding their breath, their eyes glued to every motion. Just as they placed their hands on the coffin's lid, Henry let out a deranged scream. "Don't open it! Nobody touch it!" He lunged forward in desperation, but Matthew shoved him aside, sending him crashing onto the cold church floor. Henry scrambled to get up, but James was already there, his firm hand pressing down on Henry's shoulder, pinning him in place. The entire church held its breath. The coffin lid was lifted. The air seemed to vanish from the room. Samuel was alive. His chest rose and fell weakly. His lips were dry and cracked, his eyes unfocused but open. Screams erupted through the church. Some women collapsed in shock. Some sobbed hysterically. Others covered their mouths, their hands trembling, unable to comprehend what they were witnessing. Samuel had not died. He was lying inside the very coffin that was meant to be his grave. The world around Clara faded into nothingness. All she could see was Samuel, the man she had believed was gone forever. Lucy moved first. The little girl threw herself forward, tears streaming down her face, her cries ripping through the stunned silence. "Daddy! Daddy!" Samuel blinked slowly, his lips parting as though trying to speak, but he was too weak. Lucy grasped his freezing hand, her tiny fingers squeezing tightly, as if letting go would make him disappear again. Clara collapsed beside him, her trembling hands reaching for his face. Her breath hitched, her heart pounded erratically. Samuel, and then at last her tears broke free. Samuel had returned from the dead. Henry, still pinned in place, went rigid. His wide, panicked eyes darted between the coffin and the furious villagers. His lips trembled, trying to form words, but nothing came. And then he cracked. His body shook violently as he muttered incoherently. His breath hitched in short, panicked gasps. But it was too late. The villagers turned on him. Shouts of rage erupted. Some pointed at him, screaming accusations. Matthew strode forward, his fury blazing. "You buried him alive." Henry shook his head furiously. No. I didn't know. I didn't mean to." But no one believed him. Samuel was breathing, alive, and Henry's lies had finally collapsed. Clara clutched Samuel, her voice shaking. "Help him! Someone get water!" Villagers rushed in, some fetching water, others running outside to call an ambulance. Lucy tugged at her father's hand, her tiny voice breaking through her sobs. "Daddy, don't sleep. Please don't sleep." Samuel's lips curled weakly, a faint, fragile smile. "I won't leave you, I promise." But even as relief washed over them, one truth remained unshakable. Samuel had been buried alive, and the one responsible would pay. The atmosphere in the church grew heavier, suffocating, as though the walls themselves were pressing in. The knocking from the coffin had stopped, but its echoes still haunted everyone, making their skin crawl with dread. Samuel was alive. He had been buried alive. And the only person who had any reason to cover this up was Henry. Every gaze in the church locked onto him. Henry stood there, paralyzed, drenched in sweat, his face a ghostly white. His fists clenched and unclenched, his breath rapid, erratic. He knew there was no way out. Matthew took a step forward. His expression was dark, his breath was heavy. He seized Henry by the collar, yanking him forward. His voice was ice cold. "What did you do to Samuel?" Henry's mouth opened, but no words came out. "Tell me! What did you do?" Crack! A punch landed hard against Henry's jaw. He staggered back, gripping his face where Matthew's fist had struck. Blood trickled from his split lip. The church erupted. Some villagers surged forward, screaming in fury. Others clutched at their chests, overwhelmed. Henry trembled. He lowered his head, shoulders shaking, and then he broke. Tears spilled down his pale face. He sobbed. "I didn't mean for him to die. I swear I didn't want him dead." No one felt pity. Not anymore. Matthew snarled. "What did you do?" Henry shuddered. His lips parted. His voice was barely a whisper. I just wanted Samuel to sign the papers to sell the house, but he refused." Clara's nails dug into her palms, her breathing shallow. "So what did you do?" Henry's voice cracked. "I put something in his drink, just enough to make him unconscious. Just for a little while." A roar of outrage swept through the church. Some villagers gasped, others cursed his name. "Samuel was allergic. I didn't know. I didn't think it would put him in a coma." Matthew's jaw tightened. "But you let him die. You faked his death certificate. You buried him alive!" Silence. Henry didn't fight back. He couldn't. The truth was out. Some villagers broke down, sobbing. Others clenched their fists in rage. Clara clutched Lucy tightly, her entire body trembling. If Lucy hadn't noticed, if they hadn't opened the coffin, Samuel would have died. The thought made her sick. There was no forgiveness for Henry. Sirens blared. The church doors slammed open. Sheriff Anderson stormed in, flanked by officers. His sharp gaze swept across the chaos before landing on Henry. "Someone explain what the hell is going on here." Matthew didn't hesitate. "He buried Samuel alive." The villagers erupted, shouting in agreement. The sheriff's face hardened. He turned to Henry. "Henry Jimenez, you are under arrest for attempted murder, fraud, and bribery." Handcuffs clicked around Henry's wrists. No, it was an accident." Henry struggled, but the officers restrained him. "Your words will be used against you in court." As Henry was dragged away, the villagers cheered. Samuel was saved. Henry was caught. Justice had won. Samuel was rushed to the hospital that very night. The ambulance sped away from St. Michael's Church, its siren piercing through the stillness of the night, leaving behind the stunned gazes of the villagers who had yet to recover from their shock. On the way, Clara held Samuel's hand tightly, tears streaming down her face, while Lucy clung to her father's arm, her tiny face soaked with tears, her clear eyes filled with worry. "Daddy, please don't leave me." Samuel tried to smile, but his lips were dry, his throat burning. He could do nothing but squeeze the hands of his wife and daughter, as if to reassure them that he would not leave again. By the time the ambulance arrived at St. Stephen's Hospital, the doctors rushed in immediately. Samuel was taken to the emergency room. While Clara and Lucy waited outside, their hearts gripped by fear. The air was so heavy it felt suffocating. Clara held Lucy tightly, trying to stay calm, but she couldn't stop the sobs that shook her body. The horrifying images from the church still haunted her. The knocking from inside the coffin, Samuel's pale face when the lid was finally opened. Time crawled by, stretching endlessly. Every second, every minute was torture. Each time the hospital room door creaked open, Clara's head shot up, only to sink in disappointment when no news came of Samuel. Lucy had fallen asleep in her mother's arms, exhausted. Yet the dried streaks of tears still remained on her tiny lashes. After what felt like an eternity, the doctor finally emerged. Clara rushed forward, her heart pounding wildly, her hands clutching at his coat, her voice trembling with fear. "My husband, how is he? Will he make it?" The doctor placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder, his voice calm and comforting. "He has made it through the critical stage. His body is severely dehydrated, and his mental state has suffered, but he will survive. Right now, Samuel is still weak, but he wants to see both of you immediately." Clara collapsed, sobbing in relief as tears of pure gratitude poured down her face. Lucy stirred, rubbing her tiny face against her mother's hand, before her eyes lit up upon hearing the news. "Daddy is really alive?" Clara nodded, hugging her daughter tightly before quickly carrying her into the hospital room. There, Samuel lay on the bed, still frail, but his eyes had regained their light. Samuel gave a tired smile, but his gaze overflowed with love. Clara rushed to him, wrapping her arms around his weak yet warm shoulders, sobbing uncontrollably. "You came back! You really came back!" Lucy ran to him, wrapping her small arms around her father. Her tears soaked through his hospital gown, but her voice remained soft and full of warmth. "Daddy, I thought you would leave me forever. I was so scared." Samuel closed his eyes, a single tear rolling down his pale cheek. He placed a trembling hand on Lucy's head, gently stroking her soft hair, his voice hoarse but full of love. "I'm so sorry. Lucy, I never wanted to leave you and your mother." He took a deep breath before looking at Clara, his eyes filled with raw emotion. "Clara, when I was buried alive, I heard your voice and Lucy's. But I couldn't move, I couldn't scream. I was terrified that I would slowly die in the darkness, swallowed by despair. But then it was Lucy's voice that held me back. It was your perseverance that saved me. Without the two of you, I would never have made it back. Clara burst into tears again, gripping Samuel's hand tightly as if to make sure this was not just a dream. Don't say that. I can't imagine life without you. Lucy looked up, her clear eyes glimmering with hope. Daddy, can we go home now? Samuel smiled, weak but filled with happiness.
Yes.
Lucy, we're going home. 1 month later, the verdict was announced. Henry was sentenced to 25 years in prison. When the judge slammed the gavel down, a collective sigh of relief filled the courtroom. The villagers whispered among themselves, some nodding in satisfaction, others remaining silent, as if unable to believe that justice had finally been served. Handcuffed, Henry was led out of the courtroom. He was no longer the arrogant, cold man he once was. Now he was nothing but a defeated, broken figure. He struggled, but he could not escape the fate he had brought upon himself. Before being taken away, he turned to look at Clara, his gaze piercing, as if he wanted to say something. But in the end, he simply lowered his head and walked away in silence. Clara held Samuel's hand tightly. They looked at each other, saying nothing, yet both understood that it was finally over. That same day, Samuel, Clara, and Lucy returned to their home. The sun was shining brightly, golden light spilling across the small yard, bathing the house in a warm glow, as if all the darkness and pain of the past had been washed away. Samuel stood before their home, taking a deep breath, inhaling the familiar scent of grass and the soft breeze rustling through the wooden fence. Clara stood beside him, her hand intertwined with his, the warmth and peace filling her heart. Lucy ran around the yard, her tiny feet bouncing with joy, her laughter ringing through the air. She ran to her parents, throwing her arms around them, her face beaming, her eyes sparkling with happiness. Her voice, though innocent, carried a profound truth. We are a family. No one can ever separate us again. Samuel knelt down, pulling Lucy into his embrace, his eyes filled with love. Clara rested her head on his shoulder, her heart finally at peace. The golden sunlight enveloped the three of them, marking a new beginning, a fresh chapter in their lives. One where love triumphed over all, where the truth could never be buried, and where happiness had finally returned. This story is not just a tragedy about a man who was buried alive. It is a powerful reminder of greed, betrayal, and justice. It shows that the truth can never remain buried forever, no matter how many lies attempt to cover it up. The light will always drive away the darkness. Samuel was harmed, but the unyielding love of Clara and Lucy saved him. It was a mother's fierce intuition and a child's pure heart that uncovered the truth and brought justice to the guilty. We learn that faith and love are unshakable forces. When faced with the pain of loss, Clara never surrendered to doubt. She refused to accept fate and bravely sought the answers. Lucy, a mere 2-year-old child, became the most crucial turning point, for her innocent words saved her father's life. This reminds us that sometimes children see what adults overlook, and in the darkest moments, purity and sincerity have the power to change fate. Moreover, this story serves as a harsh lesson about greed and the consequences of evil actions. Henry buried his own relative alive out of selfish ambition, but he could not escape justice. No matter how hard he tried to conceal his crimes with lies, the truth slowly surfaced, and he had to face the price of his sins. Life may give us opportunities, but no one can escape the consequences of their actions forever. In the end, this story affirms one undeniable truth. Family is the place we can always return to, the sanctuary of peace, even when the world turns cruel. No matter how much pain and suffering they endured, Samuel, Clara, and Lucy had each other, and that was the most important thing. No force could separate those who truly love one another, for real love has the strength to overcome all adversity. Let's share this story with others. If this story touched your heart, please like the video, share it with your loved ones, and subscribe to our channel so we can bring you more meaningful stories. Your support is our greatest motivation to continue telling emotional, inspiring, and life-changing stories. If you were Clara, would you have believed Lucy's words from the beginning? And what would you do if you felt something was wrong in such a painful situation? Share your thoughts in the comments below. See you next time.